I've always considered flashbacks to be like a spice. Used conservatively and in the right places, it can serve to enhance a story's flavor. Too heavy-handed and it becomes overpowering. So how much flashback do you use, and when is the best place to use it? When considering a flashback, bear in mind that it needs to do a few key things. For one, it must be relevant. If not now, then later. Not all flashbacks' importance needs to be explained at the time of first observation. Sometimes, if placed properly, it can provide needed foreshadowing for later reveals. However, if a flashback does not either offer setup or resolution to a later question, consider if it's necessary at all. Resist the temptation to throw in a flashback solely to show off some of your character's backstory. As interesting as it may be, it will only serve to satisfy you as the author and not your audience if the only reason you include it is to get that scene out there without the story reason existing to support it. Let's look at a few examples. In the opening scene of Firefly, we see a critical moment in Malcolm Reynolds' life as he and the rest of the Independents are resisting the Alliance's efforts at bringing every world out there under their control. We meet Mal and Zoe as they desperately call for support, trying to slow the Alliance advance. Despite their best efforts, their command stands down, and the war ends with the Independents on the losing side. Devastated, Mal is torn apart and broken. In Emissary, the pilot episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, we see a similar moment in the life of Commander Benjamin Sisko. In Starfleet's first major conflict with the Borg, a fleet of 40 starships engages the Cube in an effort to prevent it from reaching Earth. Armed with the knowledge of Captain Picard, the battle does not go well, and soon the fleet is broken. Captain Sisko is forced to abandon his wife, killed in the conflict, and escape with his young son, the Borg Cube, in his field of view. Filled with several flashbacks, the Buffy Season 5 episode Fool for Love tells the tale of Spike's rise to being a vampire and the long-discussed deaths of the two Slayers Spike killed. Through these little vignettes, we see both humorously and otherwise the history of this character and the details about the Slayer line we previously were not aware of. The origin of Spike's facial scar and his leather jacket are explained, both trophies of his battles with the ill-fated Slayers. In each of these, we learn something in the scene that explains a lot of the character's motivations for the initial story at hand. Despite two of these taking place at the start of the series, I still consider them flashbacks for the fact that they take place before the main narrative. The second requirement of a flashback is that it has to be comparatively short. Now that's not to say you can't do extended flashbacks, but the longer they are, the more you start to venture into prequel territory or even its own short story. Flashbacks usually need to consist of a scene or two, or possibly, as in the case of a parallel narrative, done in bits and pieces as is relevant to the story at hand. Third, it must be interesting. Now I know you're thinking that ideally the entire story should be interesting, and you're right, but to elaborate, the flashback has to justify its inclusion in the way that the general story doesn't. As you're telling your tale, you need a reason why you're diverting into the character's past, and it has to make sense to your audience why you're showing them this, at least on a surface level. No one wants to see a flashback that when you read, you can't reason why it was included. This points back to the first point of relevance. Whether it's the setup or the payoff, it needs to be clear in both why the scene was included. Say your characters see something that reminds them of a past adventure. On the surface, the visual reminder explains why they thought of that memory. But as to what the memory is, most likely it's something specific, and ideally something tied to the greater narrative you're trying to tell. And finally, a flashback must be self-contained. Imagine a flashback as a short clip of someone's past. You're not trying to tell the story of their whole life, just a story of this one particular event and microcosm. While it may contribute to the greater narrative, and probably should, the important thing is that it has to be a tiny window into their past, just enough to see what we need to see as the audience to get the point. Now you can string together a series of these to tell an overall story. This is part of that parallel narrative I was talking about before, but to do that it requires a sequence of flashbacks, each of them fitting the characteristics I listed above, and little by little adding them together to craft a story. So when using flashbacks, bear in mind that they are here to serve a very specific purpose. Use them wisely, and happy writing. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Catch you later.